Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon to our viewers, listeners, and a special welcome as well to students online. Welcome to our post-budget forum hosted by the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. My name is Trevor Johnson, Senior Fellow at Cipriani College in the Labor Studies Department. Online. And I will be your moderator for this afternoon's forum. By the Cipriani College. We have four panelists on today's forum, whom I will introduce shortly. But just to indicate before that, this session will run for 90 minutes. We will have the structure which will include a presentation by each of our guest panelists this afternoon, and following those presentations, we will get into a time of discussion and questions, of course, to the various panelists. So permit me at this point to introduce our panelists for this afternoon's forum. First of all, we are very happy and pleased to have our distinguished Professor Roger Hossain. Professor Hossain is a graduate of the University of the West Indies with first-class honors, who went on to obtain his PhD in economics from Cambridge University in 2000. He joined the economics department of UE later that same year, and he presently holds the position of senior lecturer. His research interest focuses on international trade, with emphasis on small states and their economic vulnerability. He also focuses on regional integration in the context of partial equilibrium modeling, immigrant labor in the Caribbean, and also with studies as well on the Dutch disease. He has written 10 books, either directly or with other researchers, and has published over 80 papers in both regional and international journals. We wish to welcome Professor Hossain to our panel this afternoon. I will go on as well to mention and to introduce the other panelists. We have Mr. Tahaka Obika. Mr. Obika is a trade and investment consultant, and he also lectures at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. He has held technical and leadership positions in over 10 organizations, including that of economists, lecturer in economics, and head of operations in a financial institution. He is the holder of a bachelor's degree in economics and an MBA in finance. Welcome to you, Mr. Obika. We have with us on the panel this afternoon, and I would call her comrade, Akiba Wilson, who is the Assistant General Secretary of the Contractors and General Workers Trade Union. Comrade Akiba began her trade union journey in 2010. She was elected to the position of Assistant Secretary of the National Trade Union Center in November 2021. Comrade Akiba is also a member of the Leadership Council of the Joint Trade Union Movement. She serves on the National Technical and Vocational Education Training Research Council of Trinidad and Tobago, and she holds a bachelor's degree in social work from COSTAT. Comrade Akiba has participated in several courses of the International Labour Organization and is currently pursuing a diploma in industrial relations at the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies. Welcome to you, Comrade Akiba. Finally, we have on our panel close comrade of mine, Comrade Ozzie Warwick. Comrade Ozzie Warwick is the Chief Education and Research Officer and Treasurer of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. He is also the General Secretary of the Joint Trade Union Movement, as well as the General Secretary of the Movement for Social Justice. He was elected as a member of the Financial Control Committee and Presidential Council of the World Federation of Trade Unions, and he has chaired the local organizing committee for the Assembly of Caribbean People. Thank you and welcome, Comrade Ozzy. And from our panel this afternoon, we certainly expect to have a very intriguing and interesting time. And so, therefore, I would want to move straight into the opening presentations, where each presenter, each panelist will have an opportunity to share their perspectives on the topic, of course, is the post-budget forum for the 2023-2024 budget. And the theme will focus specifically on the impact of the budget on the working class. And of course, by that, we are looking at working people. We know that once we say working people, we look at their dependents in the households, we look at retired persons, etc. So we do plan to have a very interesting time this afternoon, and we invite you to participate as we go forward. And I would invite Professor Roger Hossain, Senior Lecturer, the Economics Department from the University of the West Indies, the St. Augustine campus, to give his presentation at this time.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to say a sincere thank you for the invitation. I always try to support Cipriani whenever they have these type of sessions. I think quite a few of the people here were formerly my students at the university, so it's like participating amongst your progressed student body. So my comments here on the budget, I don't have much slides. I could do it in about 5. I would focus mainly on this diagram here, which I would spend my time explaining. Now, most of you all would know I am very concerned about the Trinidad and Tobago economy. I always approach it from a position of logic. And can I ask if the media is on this?
The Professor Hossain, the media is not on this particular forum.
Okay. So this is an economy here that I divided into 2 parts. They produce 2 goods, a tradable good and a non-tradable good. The point A is 1996. And in 1996, what happened is that the Trinidad and Tobago economy, Aussie, benefited from a massive inflow of a massive amount of natural gas. So we should have really been at a point such as B, where we were producing much more tradable goods, in this case, ammonia, methanol, and urea. And the economy would have been in a nice honky-dory position with probably, if we had done it correctly, probably about 40 billion US in the Heritage and Stabilization Fund. Now, what happened at point B, which is not a single point in time, point B is a type of a modified point in time somewhere between 2005 and 2014, is that as the government collected a lot of money, they started to spend this money out on transfers and subsidies. And they started to intervene in the economy. And so, as transfers and subsidies increased, it led to a change in the structure of production, away from producing tradable goods towards greater government employment and production of CPEP goods and production of all other type of goods. So we ended up at a point such as C. The problem is, as transfers and subsidies increase, it led to a decline in the labor force participation rate from 63.4% in 2003 down to about 55% in 2003, or if I use 2014, which is a critical point in our developmental history, it would have reached about 59%, which in the diagram is labeled at point D. So we moved from A to B to C. We moved to point D because we became relaxed, a lot of money flowing, mankind decided they want to work as they want, and everything became a relaxed type of inefficiency setting. At point D, you then had two things happening in Tariqa. The production of natural gas tumbled, as we all know, and the price of natural gas tumbled, and a massive inflow of Venezuelan came into the economy. The tumbling of the natural gas would have pushed the economy considerably back, and although it came back, Tariqa, you would have had some progress forward, but in a different direction because of the Venezuelans. Now, Tariqa, if I may use you as a representative member of the audience just for about 30 seconds, where in the top of your, rapidly, where do you see Venezuelans working?
They work in the service sector.
Right, that's good enough. They work in the services sector. And because they are mainly unregistered, they work in the informal part of the non-tradable sector.
So they don't contribute to the stores of savings at the national level.
And foreign exchange
NIS and so on.
Right. So we have found ourselves at a position such as point E. Point E is a position where we produce more non-tradable goods than in 1996, less tradable goods than in 1996, a greater amount of non-tradable goods than in 1996, and the consumption of foreign exchange is higher in relation to the production of foreign exchange at the point E where we are at now in 2023. And all of this was supervised by people that look like me and you. This, you know, we like to say, and including Ozzy, that people from North America and people from Europe are, you know, they are responsible for the people that look like me and you have the economy at point E. Now, the fundamental question then, Ozzy, is how do we move from point E? Well, quickly speaking, using the Minister of Finance outline of what will be natural gas production, you see it has tumbled considerably. You could see, and Ozzy would probably like this point, that between 2005 and 2026, our GDP didn't change, although we produced about 4 billion barrels of oil and gas equivalent. I mean, how can you do that? How can you have 10 mango trees in the back of your yard, produce 1,700 mango, and then say to me that your children are still hungry today as they were at the start of the 1,700 mango? That don't make sense. I know when I was small or young and the neighbor mango tree or mango, at the end of the mango season, I can't complain. I would have had my fair share of mango. But here we have a situation in which the level of economic activity at about 2006 is almost the same as the level of economic activity forecasted to be in 2026, and even much more than it is in 2023. We have a problem here using live, real data from the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. You know, sometimes when you say these kind of tough commentary, people would say you make up the data and think it's a good thing. My students who have been exposed over the last 30 years to hardcore technical work would see that this is straight from the Central Bank, and we have a crisis to manage. Now, where do the Venezuelans work? If you see here, the Venezuelans don't really work in manufacturing, they don't really work in agriculture, they don't really work in energy, they work in the other sector. And 1 minus energy minus agriculture minus manufacturing is services. And before they came to Tariqa, if you watch this graph here, coming from the IOM data tracking matrix, before they came, 22% work in commerce, it's now 30%, 6% in construction, it's now 18%. Well, I don't want to define what tourism and hospitality and entertainment could mean, but 4% before and 13% now, so they are mainly in the services sector. And for the young people who have done some economics before, the problem now is a double Rebezinski problem. We have moved away from having a Dutch disease problem in which we have a double Rebezinski problem. The first Rebezinski problem gave us a massive amount of oil and gas, which we didn't manage well. And the second Rebezinski problem, which is the massive inflow of Venezuelans, have left us to a point such as E, which we are struggling with, and which will take good insight and good thinking from fine minds to get you out of it. And you know, it's really discouraging. For the last 8 years or so, I have never been consulted on a budget. Never. Not even for one sentence, not even for one word. Never. And I don't think that some of my colleagues that deal with matters like this are aware that we are at point E as compared to point D or C, and therefore understand the technical fundamental nitty-gritties of what is needed to bail out the economy. And here, I am glad that I heard the young man who introduced, I think he said his name was Mr. Johnson, said he was with the banking sector in some way. Because look at the banking sector here. The banking sector financed this crisis. They supervised this position into where it is today. And so we would need the banking sector, sir, and I hope you could take this news back, to help us get out of this position where you all basically finance the non-tradable sector being considerably larger than the other parts of the economy. So in closing, what I would say is, I would say that we need to move the economy from point E to point F, which means we need to expand the manufacturing sector. You know, the manufacturing sector is doing quite well, and I would say that I was one of the people who helped design the manufacturing strategy that they are using now to double output, but we use good hardcore economic theory to help them get there. I would say that the agricultural sector has a role. I would say that the tradable component of the services sector has a role. I would say that registering the Venezuelans. I cannot imagine why a policy maker sitting down in parliament would not register the Venezuelans. Why allow them to go and work in the informal, non-tradable sector where they are using foreign exchange? How does that help the Trinidad and Tobago economy? And so I would leave you all with saying that we need to put in place measures that will move the economy from point E, where we are now, with a heavier concentration of non-tradable goods in relation to tradable, to a point such as F, where we produce significantly more tradable goods than anything else, and therefore improve the foreign exchange position. My closing sentence is this: all growth is not the same. In Trinidad and Tobago, given this situation here, we must have economic growth that generates foreign exchange. So I'd like to thank you for the few minutes to chat and to present my limited ideas. And if you have any questions, I will field about 3 now. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so very much, Professor Hussain, for that very short but insightful presentation. And yes, I know, just for the benefit of the audience, you did indicate that you have a time constraint, so that I do have at least 2 questions before you leave us. And just before I ask that of you, I just wanted to indicate to the audience, the listening audience, that our chat is enabled, so that in the event you wish to make a comment or ask a question, you won't be able to ask it live. What we are inviting you to do is to put it in the chat. It will be fed to the moderator, and we will then try to get it to the various panelists. So, Professor Hussain, I want to ask you a bit about the unemployment rate, because one of the things the Minister, the Honorable Colman Burt, Minister of Finance, indicated in his budget or during the budget debate was the fact that the unemployment rate had dropped to 3.7% as of June 2023. And he indicated that this would have been information coming from the Central Statistical Office. In fact, he said there were some 28,000 jobs that were added to the labor force in the second quarter of 2023. The question is, this seems to be at variance with what many observers are looking at in the challenging time people are having, especially young people, to find jobs. So I was hoping you could help us understand a bit when the minister talks about an unemployment rate of 3.7%. Can you unravel this for us a bit?
No problem at all. Hold on 1 minute. So I was really hoping to engage Ozzy, but it's a pity the way things work out, but I will still give my comment. I would like to hear Ozzy's comment on that later on. The current unemployment rate in 2023, the minister used quarter two 2023 data. If I average quarter 1 and quarter 2, I would get 4.3%. So 3.7, 4.3, let's call it 4.4% to be complete. So that's very low, Mr. Johnson. And the reason is this column here. Whilst you see the unemployment rate is very low, you could see here that the economically inactive population, that is the people who are not in the non-institutionalized population, but they are not also in the labor force, is very, very high. It's about 478,800. And if you look at persons with jobs, you would see in 2014, and let me quickly work out these numbers for you. You would see in 2014, we had 623,300 people. And in using second quarter data, so using the minister's numbers, we have 46,600 people less. So the minister is not wrong, but because a lot of people dropped out of the labor force, you could see it here. Are you seeing this column labeled labor force?
Yeah. Yes, we are.
And the amount of people that dropped out of the labor force between 2015 and 2003 is 42,800. So if you lose your job and you drop out of the labor force and you are not counted as the unemployed, you would see a very low unemployment rate. So the minister is not wrong at all, except that the story is incomplete and the real tragedy lies in the amount of people in the economically inactive population. We have a lot of work to do to recover the labor market. Does that make sense, sir?
Well, it's certainly a challenge that we have, and as you said, we have to unravel it, and I suppose understand what exactly, this sort of inactive sector. That's what I think the average John public would not necessarily appreciate or understand. So you have been able to unravel it a bit for us this afternoon, and hopefully, give us some perspective, because the average person out there, when you talk to them, don't necessarily quickly agree with the minister's revelation of a 3.7, or if we say 4% unemployment figure. But given the what you have clarified for us, I think it helps us to understand that. And Professor Hussain, moving on, because again, you said you had a time constraint. Looking at the 2023-24 budget, and what would you say in terms of when we look at the small and micro enterprise, what opportunities would have been given in this budget for these areas in particular? We focusing on small and micro enterprise and entrepreneurs. What jumps out at you for that? And one thing we also seem to face in Trinidad and Tobago when we give incentives is the ease of access that one might have to be able to access these incentives. So these are some concerns or observations that were made, and just want to see if you can share perspective on that.
Okay, so small and medium-sized firms, it's a very difficult time to them. But what I would say, in fairness to the way the situation has unfolded, is that in 2022, economic growth did return to the Trinidad and Tobago economy. We also have economic growth in 2023, so that once an economy is showing some signs of growth, the opportunities for the small and medium-sized enterprises will also grow. Now, the challenge for the small and medium enterprise entrepreneur is beyond the economic growth situation, I think. I think it is, how do you prevent a man from locking your neck when you finish sell doubles 10 o'clock in the night? So you may get the economy. I used to sell in the market, so I'm not talking about what people says, contrary to what Aussie's things. I used to sell crab and egg in the market, so I understand this well. Your real challenge in the context of an economic depression, or in an economy that is now coming out of an economic depression, with 607 murders last year and already close to 470 murders this year. In other words, you are in the top 10 highest intentional homicides per capita in the world, is how do you manage crime whilst you are struggling to make ends meet with a low level of economic activity? I think the economic activity is workable. Our per capita GDP, although its real GDP is 17% smaller than 2015, it's still big enough. There's still money out there to be made. But the challenge, in my opinion, is what can we do to stifle crime? Now, if again, to be fair, because I like to be fair, I saw last week the police got a lot of guns somewhere in Santa Cruz. I saw this yesterday or day before, they made a bust with cocaine. I'm seeing some more and more work being done by the police. That don't mean the small and medium-sized enterprise person is free to work until 12 o'clock in the night. It means there are small, slow steps being made in the right direction. And it's important that we acknowledge that. What I would say though, is that it's really scary out there in terms of being a business person. And whilst we may have made some strides in the last few months, in order for the small and medium-sized person to benefit from the return to economic growth, we need the right enabling environment. And the right enabling environment is one in which when you finish work 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, a man mustn't lock your neck or throw your 2 children in a crocus bag and then make a demand for ransom. That can't do. So we have some work to do.
Thank you, Professor Hussain. And we do have, if time permits, for you, one question from the audience that I'd like to just put to you. And basically, that is a question looking at what is the extent in which government budgetary measures impact industrial relations in Trinidad and Tobago, particularly as it relates to the aspects of trade union functions. And I think to some extent that this, to me, looking at the framing of this question, it may also be touching on the issue. Of course, the minister would have announced $1 billion payout, as it was referred to public sector workers before Christmas. So that if you are able to share a quick perspective on this before you leave us.
Well, that question sounds like it came from Ozzy, but I will still reply to it. No, I must say that it's a trying situation. I feel for the workers. They at UWI, and I'm not speaking here in my capacity as a university lecturer. I speak in my personal capacity as Roger was saying. UWI was offered 2%, and the increase in the price level between 2014 and 2023, if I remember correctly, it's something like 27%. I know the food price index was 45%. So you are talking about a real struggle here. At the same point in time, I know the numbers, and I know this country has a stock of international reserves of about 6 billion and an external debt close to 5 billion. So there is basically no money in terms of reserves. And our real GDP is 17% lower today than it was in 2015. I do not focus on nominal GDP. We have to focus on real GDP. And so it's a real painful situation. I don't have a clean answer for you. I feel for the workers because their real income is falling considerably. I understand for the position of the state because real GDP has fallen. What makes the problem very bad and very difficult to manage is when the Minister of Finance comes on stage and say, well, nominal GDP is the highest it was since Columbus came. I mean, you can't do them things because when you do that and then the workers ask for their attendant and consequential increase in salary, then you say it has no money. But if you are saying to me, if you were my boss and you say nominal GDP for the firm is the highest it was ever, I will say nice. I will say well done, good and profound leader. I am very impressed with you. Where my share? That is the next question. And then it is very painful when you come to me and say, well, but I can't give 2%, 4% in comparison. At a minimum, a worker would expect their salary or Z to grow at the level of the retail price index. So you remain at the same level of poverty with the same level of wealth. But when it is significantly lower, that's a problem. So I gave you my honest response. I'm saying categorically, in case the media came on after you told me I do not want to be quoted because if you want my numbers, write me. I will gracefully and willingly edit the numbers for you, but I'm not given permission to be quoted because they always quote the wrong numbers.
Thank you so very much, Professor Hussain, and we thank you for the time that you have taken with us because we know that you have indicated you have another assignment. So thanks once again, and we will move on immediately to our next panelist. That is Mr. Obika, who we invite to give his opening perspectives for not more than 10 minutes. Mr. Obika.
Thank you very much. And good evening to your institution and panelists, Ozzy Warwick, who has really and truly become this generation of trade union leaders in the country. and I'm seeing Akiva Wilson. Now, well, of course, Professor Hussein is someone who I know because I was once his student at university, and as I'm doing my PhD, I may once more become a student because I'm focused on trade, albeit microeconomics. Now, now with respect to the budget, there are many ways in which we could treat with a budget. But if we are speaking to the worker and the way in which the theme of this conversation is structured, it basically boils down to what is in it for me, the worker? What is in it for me, the small business, the micro business person, all right? And once it gets to that level, the question is, as Dr. Hussein alluded to, the Manufacturing Association focusing on doubling manufacturing by 2025 and so on. And as economists at the university, they've worked with them so they could have identified where to put their emphasis. So you have a data-driven focus where private sector is taking the lead in terms of growing the economy. Now, for that to be constructive, we always have a saying, as I'm from Point Fortin, so there's a saying, the grass can be growing while the horse starve. So we are interested in development and growth, but we are only interested in that development that will allow our families and our communities to also develop alongside this development. So the question really is, which companies and which sectors are going to be of interest to us in terms of growing? In our country, the manufacturing sector is leading the growth. So we are in an interesting situation where, coming out of the pandemic, the energy sector has not grown for 3 years, but the overall economy has actually grown. And in real terms, not in nominal terms. And that is because of the manufacturing sector. So the manufacturing sector is much smaller than the energy sector, but it has been successful in pulling the economy along. If you ask yourself, again, what is in the budget for me as a worker, then you would want to look to see if it is indeed the manufacturing sector that is causing the economy to grow. What is in the budget that targets the manufacturing sector so that I can have more jobs and more jobs in my community? All right. We have investment in e-tech parks, and persons could always say that there needs to be more, which I would always advocate for. The one in Point Fortin has been fully tenanted. There needs to be more in Point Fortin. There needs to be more e-tech parks in the further reaches of the country, so that and these parks are not heavy industry. They are lower light industry. And what it does, it gives the families in those communities with a source of savings and opportunity to invest in the development in their community. With respect to the young person who is at school, listening to the budget, it should help them decide where to put their emphasis. For instance, if again we focus on the manufacturing sector and you're a young person, you want to get involved in this sector, what opportunities are there for you? And that should be something that could be focused on in terms of an institution like Cipriani Labour College, partnering with the manufacturing sector and getting involved in ensuring the skills that persons acquire can allow them to be participants in the sector in a productive way. The overall question at the macro level, whenever you listen to our budget, is what is happening to the country? All right? We understand the issue with crime. We understand the issue with the energy sector. All right? But in general, what is the direction of the country? Historically, as I say, I only have 5 minutes. 10 minutes is running very fast. So historically, if you were a young person and you're entering the labor force in the time of my parents in the 1970s, or my parents in the 1970s, my grandparents was pre-independence, you would have looked almost exclusively to the government on one end or to the foreign company on the next end to get a job, because the foreign companies control the commanding heights of the economy. These were the last vestiges of colonialism, and the government was now trying to find its feet in terms of creating avenues for employment. The households did not create much employment in terms of large-scale industrial development and so on. You move forward 60 years down the line, you realize that we've successfully, as a nation, taken over much of the commanding heights, at least in some cases, we're sharing it, in the case of BP and so on. But in a lot of cases, the government has taken over lands from Caroni, the lands from other estates that the colonials control. And families now, local families are investing to the point where we are now spreading our wings. You have family businesses that are operating in Guyana, up the islands. The Republic Bank, which is owned by the people of Trinidad and Tobago, is in Ghana. FCB is all over the Caribbean and Central America. So the business model of the country has changed from let's wait and see, let's woo and fawn upon the foreign investor to solve our problems, to how can we as a people invest in our community? And what is the government doing to help me as a small or medium investor to take my payout from pension to get my family involved in business? And that to me is the developmental question. Developmental question in the 60s and 70s was how we get control of the commanding heights of the economy away from the colonial master, the former colonial master. The developmental question today is not that. The development question today is how can my family individually, each family member, each family unit, how can they individually be empowered to invest, which means we need to have much more tech parks and much smaller scale parks so that people can invest. And within the budget, you will see some aspects of that coming along. Of course, more is always necessary. The challenge then to individuals in those days was to get active in actions that would force the hand of the government to push and take over the commanding heights. Now the challenge now to individuals is inward looking, to force themselves to get involved in business and to push their government to support their entrepreneurial aspirations so that they can be productive actors. All right. So 10 minutes is a very short time. I think I've almost expired it. So I'll just end with this one statement here. In all that we do as a nation, it is always important to take the long view, to understand where we have come from. It's not a 5-year journey, and to decide in terms of strategic long-range planning where we want to go. And the decisions, the hard decisions that we must take must be informed by that, as well as the benefits that must accrue must also take into consideration that the horse must eat while the grass is green. So that's basically it. And I want to just say one thing. For one specific ministry, I want to encourage all young people to get involved in the Youth Agriculture Homestead Program. You're getting access to land that never happened in my generation. We got access to house pots and AGC houses, and maybe you could rent some agricultural land from the government. But now you actually have access to owning 2-acre parcels and building. And then you have youths now getting involved in a youth business park, which is a derivation of ETech, but for young people. We didn't have that. We got access to some incubators. You could come and do some cottage industry stuff. Because again, the business model wasn't to get you heavily involved in business historically. But now that is the business model. So it's important that we change the messaging to the young people, and not just about wing and phoning on foreign investors, but for us to become the investors and the masters of our own destiny. And the last point I'll say before I end the 10 minutes, I read 4543, so the exact on the bottom. As a banker, there was a statement that a senior banker was explaining to me before he retired. He said that putting all your money in a mutual fund and expecting someone else to manage it for you by investing in other person's businesses is not intelligent investing. putting part of your portfolio in active business is intelligent investing. So you take part, you put it in a mutual fund, so you need to have access to that cash to participate in the success of others in that way. Part, you can put part in the stock market and so on. But putting part of your business, whether it is selling sugar cake for Borrowday in Point Fortin, you understand? Or your lump sum as a pensioner and investing it in a restaurant. Taking part of the business, your portfolio, and investing it is what is necessary going forward as a nation. An entrepreneur in every family should be the aspiration as a people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obika. And we will, of course, come back to you in the discussion and question time. I saw part of the focus of your presentation, of course, was the opportunities for young people in Trinidad and Tobago. And perhaps at the question time, we'll pick up on that in terms of even looking at the alignment of the current education system and how it's preparing young people to be able to take up those opportunities. So thanks again. At this time, I would like to invite Comrade Akiba Wilson to do her opening presentation for not more than 10 minutes. Comrade Akiba.
Thank you, Comrade Johnson. Panelists, good afternoon, everyone. I think I may be a little less than 10 minutes, but we'll see. So I'm going to touch on a topic that may be a little touchy or taboo for some as it relates to the 4%. Within the budget, I want to say that the Minister of Finance, they didn't even consider reviewing the 4%. And I like to break down what a 4% means to the working class population, because the Minister of Finance, he would have made it seem as though this payout of how much of $1 billion, when the population hears it, they believe that one person is getting a whole set of money. But if we look at it from a perspective of an individual, we'll see where, for instance, a person who receives a lower salary, I'll talk about San Fernando City Corporation to be exact, a laborer gets $235 a day. When you do the calculation of, in 2020, 0%, so the salary has not changed. 2015, 0%, the salary still has not changed. In 2016, we get 2%. Or, and I must say, we say 4%, but we have to understand when we're saying 4% is 4% over 2 periods, right? Because we hear 4% and we believe it's just 4% for 1 period. So in 2016, 2%. So the salary changed from $235 to $239.40, which is a $4.70 increase on somebody's salary for a 3-year period. If we continue, 2017, 0%, $239.70 the salary remain, because that was the last from 2016. 2018, the same salary, and in 2019, the additional 2% again is a $4.79 increase. So when we look at it in total, we see that per day, in average, a worker gets $240 increase on the salary, which is $47 a fortnight and $94 a month. So for the period 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, well, and I think they said they wanted to bring it straight up to current, which will be 2023, a worker gets $94 on the salary a month. So I know the economists will say that the economy is bad right now, but when the economy was good in 2015 and beyond, the government didn't see the need to actually have negotiations or give a percentage that would have been beneficial to the lower working class. In addition to that, I want to say that if I want to touch on the minimum wage one time, because I think the both kind of ties into each other. A minimum worker receives, well, the minimum wage actually would have been $17.50. A $3 increase would be $20.50. Which will total to $3,280. If we put ourselves in the person on the street, the lower class, the working class, $3,280 a month literally does not do anything. Because if you check out somebody who has to pay rent, if you're looking at rent for apartments, whether 2-bedroom, because a person is not them alone, that's $3,280 already covered rent. So it's like, yes, you're giving, but you're not giving anything that would be sufficient to us, the persons who are at the lower end of the scale. Because I remember the minister, he did say that this budget was expected to help the persons who are the lower end of the scale, lift the burdens from them. But technically, it's not lifting any burdens from the persons at the lower end of the scale. I also want to touch on, as it relates to part when it comes to youth job creation, because they didn't really touch on anything in the budget as it relates for job creation for youths. He would have indicated that it had a decline from 4.9% in January to March 2023, and it went to 3.7% for the period of April to June 2023. But when we look at the labor market, my question is, these figures come from where? Are we taking into consideration, or is the government taking into consideration or adding the persons who are on contract? Because when you work from a month-to-month contract, technically, to me, you're unemployed, because at any time that contract could not be renewed. So I would like to know where the government is getting that figure from as it relates to the decrease in job. And then to add it, most of the young people in Trinidad and Tobago, they have no job security, as I would have mentioned, as it relates to contract. So they leave Trinidad and Tobago. So our resources as young persons are leaving Trinidad and Tobago to go to seek better job opportunities and benefits outside of Trinidad and Tobago. So we are also losing the young persons who are well educated, who could give back to society, because the government is not putting any place. We see from the 2023 to 24 budgets as it relates for the young persons. And I think that will be all that I'm touching on for now, and well, as it relates to any question, because I think those are the three critical things, where will be the 4% and job creation as it relates to youths and the minimum wage. So I think I was less than 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Comrade Akiba. And you made it very clear, key issues that you are looking at, the 4% payout to public sector workers and its real impact, the minimum wage issue, and also your concerns about job creation for young people in Trinidad and Tobago. So thank you so very much for sharing your perspectives with us on the 2023-2024 budget. And we now come to Comrade Ozzy Warwick. Comrade Ozzy, of course, for many of us, you need no introduction, but I'd just like to invite you to share your perspective on the budget, and then, of course, following you, we would get into a discussion with all of the panelists. Comrade Ozzy.
Yes, thank you very much, Comrade Johnson. And it's really good to be on what I consider to be a very exciting post-budget panel. I think it's the most exciting post-budget panel I've seen since the budget. All those bourgeois media on CNC3, TV6, and all of the Chamber of Commerce panel, those panels make no sense, because none of them touch the real day-to-day life of people. So I really love this panel, and I want to say, when you have to speak last after people like Akiba, Obika, and Roger, all I could say really is I concur with all the speakers. Thank you very much, and I look forward to questions and answers. But since, Trevor, you want to wring my hand to at least say something, a little bit more than that, I'll just say a few things, really. And it's more reflection. Sorry, I'm not going to really deal with the budget. Just some reflection, some thoughts, especially listening. And this is strictly coming off of what I heard from the panel, the other three panelists, because they were really fantastic presentations. You know, the budget really is a kind of crazy thing, you know, because if you really think about it, there is this guy, he stands up for 4 hours, read God knows what. You try to follow, you may listen for 10 minutes, go cook something, come back and he's still talking. And you're not getting a sense as, is this going somewhere? So here what you do it. You're trying to listen for anything that will hit your pocket right away. Increase fuel price. Are they really going to increase the minimum wage? Are they going to settle public sector negotiations? And that's what the budget has become. And it's really sad. It's unfortunate. So I want to start off there. The next thing I want to say and reflecting on is, It's something that I see going around as a sort of meme and a joke, but it's actually not it's not funny on a fundamental level. This is the Minister of Finance, okay? He is presenting a national budget, and he is joking with the opposition about gastrointestinal intestines and that they and quote and made a joke what they go do if they see the next budget. Now here I'm a difficulty with that. It's not them who's suffering really, you know. I mean, they're MPs. So is the minister suggesting that there's absolutely nobody suffering in this country? That nobody's struggling to make ends meet? That there aren't single mothers, single fathers who's had to borrow money to send the children to school? That the landlord knocking on the door every month and they had to go quickly to borrow money from cousin, auntie, Kwenge to make up the little $1,500 or the little $1,000 because they don't want to be thrown on the streets? No. I think that was really a total disrespect to this country and a disregard for ordinary people who are really struggling. Now, in terms of what is the budget supposed to be? Is it, I want the audience to just feel this for a minute. You hear terms loosely flown around, but at the end of the day, the management of an economy is not for someone to boast about GDP increasing. It's about your standard of living as a citizen of a country. So GDP increasing, decreasing, and all the numbers that you hear, we were able, the famous one, close the deficit gap. Okay, sounds nice, but my landlord waiting outside for my rent. All right, I studying well. If I have no job because they just sent me home? I had to go and now face my family. I had to face my wife, face my husband, face my children, and tell them they just sent me home, you know. And it had nobody else working in the household. All right. So I just want people to always remember when you hear policymakers, politicians, and even bourgeois economists and commentators come on and they rattle off a few things, that at the end of the day, it has to be about your standard of living, because all of it means nothing if the standard of living of our citizens is falling. I think that, as I said, it's some reflections, right? Now, it can't be that only one group of people carrying the burden of economic adjustment. Because it can't be that in good times, you have all the incentives for business, entrepreneurs. But then in bad times is when you tell your workers, well, sorry, things hard. Okay. So it means that the workers have to carry the full burden of adjustment. That is problematic. Now, I want to respond to a few things that Roger said earlier. And it's a pity that he had to go and he had to leave, because I really wanted to engage him, because I'm sure he would be happy to hear that a lot of what he presented actually supports my argument and thesis. Because he talked about from a position of logic, but it's capitalist logic and a continuation of neoliberal policies that have created the very same thing the data is showing us. And what is that data showing us? That we are producing, and he's correct, more non-tradable and less, so more non-tradable goods and less tradable goods. That's the capitalist logic that we have been implementing over the last 8 years, and this is what it has resulted. It has also resulted in a consumption of foreign exchange, which has increased significantly, but the production of the foreign exchange, that has decreased significantly. All right? The same logic, capitalist logic and neoliberal policies we have endured for the last 7 to 8 years has done what? It has leveled off economic activity that has plateaued. Apparently, the data is proving my point. And that notwithstanding the ministers, and it was good that you asked that question, because notwithstanding the statement that unemployment is 3%, when you go behind the numbers, what the numbers conceal is in fact that a lot of people are economically inactive. Of course they're economically inactive because they lost their jobs. All right? They lost their jobs. So the economic modeling, this capitalist logic and neoliberal policies that have been aggressively implemented, where it is about profit before people. So it's all about, you got to make a profit, you got to make a profit. It's about the bottom line, you got to make a profit. But then who does that serve? So you're making this profit at the expense of the standard of living of your people? And you think that that is a good logic? Impossible. Impossible. And then this thing about, and this was a really bothersome statement, there is money to be made. There is money out there. Well, now we have a real problem, because if there is money out there and there's money to be made, but you are having more and more ordinary poor people, their salaries, or what you call it, salaries, they call it a pay, because a salary, one would assume, is because you have a decent term and condition, which people don't have. What people have is month-to-month contract and a day-to-day hustle. That is sweet Trinidad and Tobago, and that is a model that we seem to like. Month-to-month contract and day-to-day hustle. Okay. But that is just being deteriorated, eaten away in terms of increasing fuel prices, increasing the cost of living, increasing food, and so on. So then, where is that money going to go? Somebody going to take it. And it ain't ordinary poor people, because ordinary poor people losing money, all right? Just the value of their little $10 in the last 5 to 6 years is gone, right? Now, I want to say, I was reflecting a little bit also on Obika made a point. I mean, he made a lot of good points, but I want to just Obika, if you bear with me, just reflect a little bit on this issue of owning the commanding heights of the economy. Now, I hear the point about the model has changed, but then I ask myself, okay, but then why is it that BP, Shell, BHP Billiton, multinationals, have still such a deep control on our economy? And then, if you want to go a little local, Massey, Guardian Holding, Answer Group. So the concentration of wealth is not, you're right, it's not just the multinational, but now we have a local bourgeoisie who are consolidating their wealth and power in this country. All right. So I want to be on time, right? And just to close off on a point that Akiba was making, because she had 3 good points about, I think she deconstructed the myth of the 4%. That was very good. And what the minimum wage really don't mean. I think that is the best way I could call it. What that increase in the minimum wage don't mean. And then she talked about the lack of jobs for young people. But I want to go back to end on the minimum wage. You know, when the issue came up and the labor movement said $30 and so on, and then there was a to and fro in. I heard bourgeois economists and commentators say, well, it can't be just about the number. Yeah? It can't be about the number. You figure the $30 or the $20 or $25. You know what I find strange and contradictory about that? When it comes to poor people and working people, it's not about the numbers. Well, if that is the case, that should be the same for the profits. So why profits for companies is about the number? It's about a bottom line. It's about the profit is not made up of real money, all right, and social money, you know, which is what they're trying to suggest, that the minimum wage you should focus on the sort of social. And I'm thinking, what am I hearing here? So for multinationals, for big conglomerates, for big business, all these people have these huge malls and so on and expanding all over the place. For Starbucks and them, I don't know that I could go into Starbucks and tell them, when they tell me $18 for the house brew, I could say, well, I have $10 and the other $8 is in my social, contribution. I don't think so. They want to see $18. So don't tell me that this issue of the minimum wage, we shouldn't focus on the figure. Yes, you have to focus on the figure. Why? Because we exist in a monetary system of capital. It is driven by, you pay rent with money. You buy food with money. You go into the mall, and when you buy your pants and your little shirt, you pay money. So don't tell me that the minimum wage we shouldn't focus on the dollar value. We must focus on the dollar value because that is what people exchange in the real world. Because you see, okay, I'm going to close here. I promise. It's like when it comes to poor people and ordinary people, it's like you must live in an illusionary, separate virtual world. But when it comes to profits and business, yeah, that's when they talk about the real world. You see that contradiction? All that does is create more hardship for ordinary working citizens. And let me say something. People will only take so much for so long. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Comrade Ozzy, again, for that very emphatic, insightful presentation. And we are getting some questions from the audience in the chat. So I think I want to start off to Mr. Obika with one of them, and this basically focuses on the issue of crime, and I think this is important from the perspective we may wonder, okay, we're talking about the impact of the of the budget on working class people. What does crime have to do with that? Well, the reality is that some people are not sure whether they come out their house to go to work or they are going back home on an evening or after a night shift. They simply don't have the measure of comfort that one would have had 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that you can make your way home and you will not be subject to some sort of criminal engagement. And and of course, over the past year, let us not forget that scores of people have been murdered on the job or at the workplace. I'm talking, for example, like security guards. We have had a number of security guards shot and killed in different scenarios, but we have also had other workers, etc. So crime does impact the workplace. And in fact, there was a presentation by Cipriani College to the Joint Trade Union movement some time ago on the impact of crime on the workplace. But this question is, it starts off by making a statement. Mr. Obika, do you think the small man has the money to bring in all of these big guns? I think Professor Hussain would have reminded us of the gun hauls over the last week or two. And the person asking the question actually responds. He says, no. So tell me, who are the main contributors to crime, and who are just the foot soldiers? In other words, what this question is asking, Mr. Obika, what is the budget would have made a significant allocation, of course, to the Ministry of National Security, as anticipated. That is what it has been like over the last decade or more. So perhaps you'd want to comment on that, because there are clearly concerns out there even from ordinary working people about crime, about their ability to leave home and to return home, or what might happen on the job. Mr. Obika.
Crime. How do we even get to answer a question on crime and be comfortable? There are many layers to even beginning to appreciate crime. I'll start with the issue of the prisons. It is impossible to believe that you can put someone in a 2x4 cell with 10 other people in subhuman conditions and expect them to be reformed. To me, that is the one big issue. That has been a big issue of mine. I've been a teacher for some time, and I continue to teach, although at the tertiary level now. Unless we recognize that putting persons, the only punishment that prison should mean is restriction on your freedom, not restriction on your dignity, not a reduction of your dignity. So the only reduction should be your movement, not your dignity as a human being. And we forget that when these persons come back out, they have to take the same maxis, go to the same markets, the same supermarkets as the rest of us. So that to me is the first thing. We think about crime only from crime fighting. You have to fight crime. And we have to get more police, we have to get more guns, we have to get more. I am always of the view, I mean, I grew up in Enja, so we have always of the view that the solution starts with the family and ends with the family. And and the family must mean empowering men as fathers, supporting men as fathers in families, and supporting and ensuring that the woman is comfortable in the family, in her role as a mother in the family, and ensuring the healthy development of children. We have to be very careful not to take everything from the West, because America has failed in terms of crime. If you go to any American city, it's the worst. You could die just by going to watch it. There was some mass killing recently. And this notion that the more guns we give people, I don't want to have a gun. So what will having a gun do with solving crime as an individual? That is a reactionary populist response. The response to fighting crime should start with ensuring that we accept that crime fighting is not the solution to crime. Crime fighting is the plaster for the sore. That is crime. And once we begin there, we'll be on the right track. And then when you condemn persons in prison, they must be treated as humans. There must be no reduction in dignity. The other thing is corruption in terms of criminal acts is something, especially when money is involved, that is not street level. All right. So treating with the young people on the blocks and so on, in the 1970s, the solution then was literature. They read books. All right. We know what was the Western response to that regarding the subversion of that. The solution has to be engaging people in a positive way where they are and turning centers of negativity into centers of production. And it cannot be giving more guns to people. It has to be a solution where we focus on positive development of all. Yes, crime fighting is necessary, but crime fighting is a response. So if the level of crime is high, the response in terms of crime fighting will be high. If the level of crime is low, the response in crime fighting will be low. It's like I grew up in Point Fortin. You don't need to see police walking around the place because the family unit is strong. If a young man is giving trouble, the grandmother, the uncle, the father will carry him to the police station and say, Sergeant, deal with him. I ain't wait to lock him up, but just came now, hold him there for the day. You understand? Talk to him. And if he given trouble, they will go to court and make sure that their own child faces justice. You know? Now, that speaks to the strength of the family. All right? And I will make a statement that some may find difficult. But we can't promote single motherism. That is a death of the family. You can't promote single fatherhood either. You have to promote family development. And for example, there are programs that persons have access to because we've borrowed wholesale Western thinking that that you only give access if it's a single parent, single mother. You understand? But this time they are co-parenting. The father is also involved in the child's life, but they're not together. And when you make access to programs of social welfare, not based on the client, which is the child should be the client, but they make the client the single mother. You encourage the separation of families. The client should always be the child. But again, I've digressed. In terms of crime, I think that it should not be a question of focusing on just crime fighting. That is just the response to whatever the level of crime is. Crime is lower in point, you have less police. Crime is higher in tongue, you have more police. But that crime fighting is a response. The solution is in giving people access to opportunity. In Point 14, when there was a problem with Gun Hill, the solution was people got jobs. There is no talk about Gun Hill as an issue in Point 14 today, but when I was growing up, that was a big deal. You understand? So the solution to crime has to be engaging in a positive and constructive manner. Persons who are engaging crime. But persons who are involved in high-level crime need to face the full brunt of the law without any fear whatsoever. To solve that, we have to deal with any issue with corruption in the law enforcement agencies, because it is not easy to deal with a big man in the criminal world. So you need to be very careful how you treat with that, because you have to be final when you treat with the problem. But with street level activity, we need to think about the human dignity of the persons and focus on family. I'll end it because I could talk forever on that point. But I will just say this, in terms of the family, we need to do studies locally, because in the US, they did studies that showed that in terms of delinquency and going to prison, the chances of a child going to prison was significantly higher if they came from a single mother household. But once a father was anywhere in the household, whether it's single father or two-parent household, the chances of success of the children was higher. So we are following a Western thinking which chases the father out of the system, when we should be using a system that focuses on family. And family requires both the mother and the father. I'm a husband and I'm a father. And I grew up in a home with my parents. You understand? The whole point will know them, and love will know. You understand? And my parents did work together, and they are still here with us today. So I believe in focusing on family. And even when the family breaks down, where they're not together, finding ways in which we can have healthy interaction for young men who have gone astray in terms of male figures in their lives. As a teacher, I've seen it, a male authority figure, positive male authority figure in the life of a young man means a lot. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Comrade Obika. We'll come back to you later on. I want to shift the labor representatives on the panel, Comrade Ozzy and Comrade Akiba, because I have a document here which indicates that there was a specific representation to the Minister of Finance by the labor movement. I understand it was a proposal of the Joint Labor Federation to the minister, and there are a couple issues that pop up here that I just want either of you, Comrade Ozzy or Comrade Akiba, because there's reference to a recommendation for reduction in fuel prices. There's also reference to the issue of the retirement age, which currently it is generally given that the retirement age in Trinidad and Tobago is 860, though of course we know there are some variances to that, but generally speaking, it is accepted to be 60, and we are hearing of a not just hearing a strong push for that to go to 65. So and also as well the issue of the property tax. So I'm just wondering between you, because we don't have too much time again, if we could get some labor perspective on that. And whilst you on that, we do have a question in the chat which is seeming to focus on why did instead of advocating or focusing on the 4%, should the focus not have been on pursuing the consolidation of cost of living allowance? So I'll leave that up to you how you interpret that, but that is a question in the chat regarding the whole issue of the 4% and the settlement. So I've just thrown those elements out to you, and if you care to respond, perhaps, I don't know, Comrade Akiba first, and then Comrade Ozzy can take a couple of them each.
Thank you, Comrade Johnson. I will deal with the 4% in particular, the consolidation of the COLA. So the unions, when we met with the CPO on well, I don't want to say numerous occasions, but about 2 occasions, 3 for the most, we would have asked for the consolidation of COLA. The CPO, no uncertain terms, indicated that the Minister of Finance will not consolidate COLA. So it's not that the union has not been asking or trying to get the consolidation of COLA with the 2%. It was, they were adamant that the consolidation of COLA is not on the table and it's nowhere in existence. We would have also just a touch, because persons will think that the trade union movement only focus on the money aspect, like the 4%. We would have also indicated that, okay, if you all could only give 2%, there are other instruments that you all could use to give the persons, whether it's bonds, other instruments, and not just the 2%. So when we look at the ministers, they would seem as though the trade union movement is only asking for money, but we are asking for, outside of the percentage, anything that could better increase the living wage of our members. So it's not just about 4%, and I'll stop saying 4%, 2% for a period. So not 4%, 2% per period. So we don't only focus on that, we focus on other aspects. But in order for negotiations to continue, 2 parties have to be willing to. Yes, the trade union movement was, but I cannot, as it relates to the CPO and the ministers, they were not. Negotiation needs 2 persons to agree, not just the trade union movement. So I'll end there. And Comrade Ozzy, you can continue.
Thanks, Comrade Akiba. Comrade Ozzy?
Well, no, I definitely don't need to add to that. Excellent elaboration. So I just kind of talk a little bit about
retirement age and property tax, so 2 of the other areas.
Well, okay, just to say again, those, to me, those things are further burdening ordinary people. So I make my contribution, and I've worked for how much, 40 years, whatever. And now you're telling me that because of your mismanagement, because you are unable to get more and more people onto the system, that I have to carry that burden, you know. And what about the people in the protective services, fire officers, prison officers, police officers who are currently retired at 55? So they already have to wait 5 years till 60. Now you will punish me for every year in which I want to retire at. Okay, so I mean we stand firmly that on no to that. If you want to resolve the issue at the NIB, you need to put people in decent jobs, and to get more and more young people. We are graduation going on. You know how many young people are graduating? 9,000, and about 8,999 of them might fly out and leave the country. Okay, put people in jobs, and so we are completely against this increasing the retirement age. And with regards to the fuel price, I want to remind people, take note, because oil price going back up, and you're going to hear them come on the public platform to convince you as to why they need to remove the final level of subsidies because of the market. But when the oil price was down, they did not decrease, and we were supposed to be, it's supposed to be market, it was supposed to be a market price at the pump, but the pump and move, Trevor, the pump and move, since it gone up, it just stay up, and that's it. All right. So I just want to point those 2 things out. But there is something I don't want it to slide, because to me it's at the heart of this whole discussion, and it's something Obika said. And he gave a very insightful response to the crime question, but then he said something in passing, and I don't want us to take it for granted, because to me it's at the heart of everything. He said the way they dealt with Gun Hill is that people got jobs. You cannot be taking away people jobs and have people hustling day to day to survive and think that somehow there will not be a social impact, a severe social impact. So I want to leave that there.
Comrade Johnson, if I may, just want to touch on one thing that Comrade Ozzy didn't, as it relates to the property tax. Again, the citizens are bearing the cost of it, because I remember the minister said that okay, residential is getting property tax, but commercial, they are holding on. And if we want to implement property tax, okay, no problem. But why it is that the citizens, the residents have to endure that, and the commercials who are actually making the money is not enduring the property tax. So that is another aspect that we need to look at.
Thanks, Comrade Akiba. And just one aspect I needed to have clarified, Comrade Ozzy, from your comments on the retirement age, because the Minister of Finance in the budget presentation did indicate that the government had been speaking to stakeholders and that the majority of stakeholders agreed with the government position to push the retirement age to 65. I know the trade union movement or individual trade unions would be one of these stakeholders, but when the minister said that the majority of stakeholders agreed, do you have any idea or concept who or what entities he's referring to? And I'm asking that because it appears that when you speak to John Public or, man in the street, the majority of people seem to have concerns about pushing the minimum wage, the retirement age up. But yet the minister is indicating that, well, we have spoken to the stakeholders, the majority of them have agreed. So I just wanted to, if you are able to share a quick perspective on that as we are drawing to a close shortly.
I don't know that the minister spoke to any stakeholders other than probably his friends who are over 60. I mean, who stakeholders? Who are these majority of stakeholders? Name them. One would think if you're making such a definitive statement, you would say, well, we met with this grouping, we met with that grouping, The fact is, there's no, I mean, especially ordinary working people, who in their right mind gonna say, well, yeah, I'm gonna work for an additional 5 years to access my pension. They talk about demographics, right? The demographics, they're looking at the demographics. But okay, the demographics reflect that which is in a current moment in time, right? But if we have a lot of our young people leaving the country because of the economic situation, then yes, of course, the demographics would look like that. But the fact of the matter is that we have not created decent jobs for people. And I'm not going to just, have that slide under the carpet, because it was decent jobs in the 1960s. Coming out of the 1970s, one of the things the revolution did is it forced the national bourgeoisie to enter into a compromise with workers because they recognize the strength and power of people, and they created decent jobs for people. What has happened since then? Closure of ArcelorMittal, closure of Petrochen, closure of Unilever, closure of several contracting companies. These were the jobs that were dignified jobs. Now it's just the energy sector. In the energy sector now is just a hustle. It's no longer a dignified job to work in the energy sector. It's now a hustle. So I just want if it's my closing, because it's almost that time, if you allow me to use the opportunity to just close with how I started. It has to be about the standard of living of our citizens, the reproduction of their daily life, and our citizens living a life with dignity. And the way in which we have implemented our capitalist logic and in neoliberal policies over the last 5 to 7 years have stripped away the dignity of the majority of ordinary working people who can no longer aspire to a dignified job and therefore live a dignified life. Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Comrade Ozzy. And Comrade Akiba, I was going to allow you to go first with closing comments, but your comrade jumped ahead of you. But I can't leave you for last. So Obika, I'm going to come to you to close off, but let me hear from Comrade Akiba, your closing comments. You have a maximum of 3 minutes.
No problem. I just want to start with my closing statement saying that the trade union movement, we are not fooled by the 2023-2024 budgets. the budget feel like if it's still a burden on the citizens, it's still an imposed burden. And the basic necessities are food, water, shelter, air, clothing, as such. And if, for instance, I like to say, if air was coming at a cost, the lower population would have died long time, because we are literally suffering. And my question is, well, it's a rhetorical question. Is the vulnerable group in society not counted as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago? Because we don't feel like citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. We feel like if we are bastard children, to be exact, and we are not legitimate. And as our union will say, a worker is a worker. So at the end of the day, in a land of blind man, a one-eyed man is king. And I just want to leave with that.
Thank you, Comrade Akiba. And we have to hope, based on your comments, that a way isn't found to commodify air, because we will all be struggling to breathe. So let's hope that some creative person does not find a way to commodify the air that we breathe, because who knows what could happen. Yeah, I mean, anyway, Comrade Obika, a couple times in the chat, questions have come up. I know it's coming with, if you could incorporate in your closing comments, because you made reference when you were speaking at the start about the opportunities for young people that you see the budget presents in access to agricultural land, and in other areas, your trade investment consultant, and you made references to all of that. But the concern that keeps coming up in the chat is how our education system is aligning to ensure that young people can access these opportunities, because there seems, some observers would suggest that there seems to be a misalignment with what is being taught in schools now and what what young people are preparing for. It is said that a lot of the things that young people are studying for now, for the jobs that exist now, 50% of those jobs will not exist by 2030. So if it is young people are to access any opportunities, as you have described from this particular budget, how does the education system prepare them for that? So we'd allow 3, maximum 4 minutes, because this incorporates your closing comments and before we come to an end. Comrade Mr. Okiba.
Yes, my brother. So, well, to give the education system, of course, has never been a static thing. It has to progress. Of course, there are aspects of the system of education that does not treat with the developmental challenges of the country. One shining example, remember we are part of CARICOM, is the CARICOM, the Caribbean vocational qualifications that persons can get, whether it's in steel pan manufacturing, triple ET, MET, mechanical engineering technician. Those types of skill-based qualifications have been rebooted and revamped, and they are available. The question is whether or not all the schools have them available, because in the past, it used to have these comprehensive schools that had these programs, and now they're making it available in all schools to some extent. So I guess it would be really for a question. It's something that we have to treat with as a country, making sure that the subjects that we encourage our students to pick is in line with the developmental agenda of the country, just as happens at the tertiary level. So for example, at the university level, we don't train a certain amount of nurses that is significantly short of the required number we need. We train sufficient amounts in every sector. We train more economists than we, for example. But at the secondary school level, when someone is choosing subjects, it's basically you, your parent, and God, and your form teacher that decides the subject you choose. So it may mean that we need to go down to the secondary school level and work with the form teachers at that level to make them understand, okay, these are developmental challenges of the country, and we don't need so much librarians. We need a little more coders. We need a little more programmers. We need a little more of these kinds of things. I think that is the exercise that we have to do. And the job landscape is changing even faster than it was when I was going to school. So the response has to be faster. So it's something that is needed to be done. And I guess as a nation, we have to come together. However, in terms of the skills acquisition part, we are working well there because of we have the Caribbean vocational qualifications in many of the schools, but some schools not so much, of course. In closing, I would just say that I always like to busy my mind with what is the long-term developmental challenge of the country, and included in the decisions that are made at the national level. And I want to encourage citizens that the decision-making process should not be one where you sit and wait and hear what happens and then you make a response to that. Historically, in our country, we used to have clubs all over the country, social clubs where persons would go and they would engage in serious national discussion. And that coalesced into the movements that we had in our nation's history. We had the Elma Francois Forum, and she was a giant on both the African question and the workers' rights question. So, and the national and Caribbean question. So, but her presence she gave birth to many of these types of organizations. Maybe we need to get back to the grassroots level where in our communities, we have these social clubs that treat with the developmental questions of our community and of our country. Right? Because we need a grassroots country, not a top-down society.
Thank you very much, Mr. Obika. And as we draw to a close this evening, this post-budget forum hosted by the Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, permit me to thank all of our panelists, Professor Roger Hussain, Senior Lecturer in Economics at the Department of Economics in the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus, Comrade Akiba Wilson, Assistant General Secretary, Contractors and General Workers Trade Union, Mr. Tahaka Obika, Trade and Investment Consultant, and of course, Comrade Ozzy Warwick, Chief Education and Research Officer and Treasurer of the Oilfield Workers Trade Union. This has indeed been a very exciting and enlightening forum. I think we have held the interest of all of the audience, our students included. And just to mention to the representatives of the labor movement, one of the questions or comments we weren't able to get to in the chat is the fact that that workers in the country are looking forward to the concluding of negotiations for the period 2020 to 2023 or 24, because for most of the public sector, the negotiations with the 4% would have ended with the period ending 2019. So it would be unfair if, even though we didn't get to answering that question fully, but I have a responsibility to let you know of that comment in the chat, that, reminding the labor movement that we cannot stand idly by and, not focus significantly on drawing negotiations to a conclusion for that period. So I'm just the messenger. I'm just repeating what I've seen in the chat. So I'm just repeating it to the representatives of the labor movement. But we really thank all of the panelists. Professor Roger Hussain really started off. He had to leave early due to a time constraint, but he really gave us a very interesting presentation and helped us to understand the whole aspect of the unemployment rate and how that was arrived at. And of course, we heard from the representatives of the labor movement and their perspectives on things like the minimum wage, the retirement age and the 4% increase, etc. So we certainly got a perspective on that from them, and of course from Mr. Obika, we would have trade and investment consultant. We'd have gotten his perspective in terms of what incentives there have been in the budget and the focus on opportunities for young people. So we really want to thank all of our panelists for your input, for your contributions this evening, for your patience. And we want to thank, of course, our audience and, of course, our students who are all online, and for those who would have sent in questions or comments. And in the background, I want to thank all of our technical and support staff who would have ensured that our online forum was maintained without any glitches. So a big thank you to our support staff and, of course, our technical staff who are here supporting us from the Elmer Francois Institute of Cipriani College of Labor and Cooperative Studies, and from the Labor Studies Department of the college. So thank you all. I believe I was looking for the feedback. Yeah, there is a feedback form in the chat, which we invite members of the audience to just take a few moments and you can just give some feedback on that form. It would certainly assist us in going forward in any adjustments to be made. So thank you very much, and do have a pleasant evening all. Thank you.
Thank you, Comrade Johnson. Bye all.
Bye all. Bye Akiba. Bye Comrade Ozzy. Bye
Thank you
Mr.
very much.
Obika.
Yeah, excellent panel. Great.